This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own move. Carrington. North are in front.
Yeah, I mean, some days are better than others, aren't they? And that was a shocker. Welcome back to North Pod. If you're listening to this, you are some kind of sycophant, some kind of glutton for punishment, and I thank you for it, but it's going to be difficult to be positive about that game of football. I'm going to be honest, I have prepared very little. I've had a look at the 5 stars and done my usual notes throughout the game, but I haven't synthesized those notes and really thought too carefully about it because I didn't want to give this game much more time than I had to. So this is going to be a little bit more off the cuff. Might mix things up a little bit in the second half. We'll see how things go. But yeah, what a shocker. Let's get into the podcast. If it's your first episode, can I recommend going back and listening to literally any other episode? Because yeah, I just have a feeling this isn't going to be an uplifting one. I will try my best to glean some positives, but boy, that was awful. We'll start with team selection and then we'll jump into the rest of that nightmare. There was a few outs, couple of changes, some through form. We know Shees is through injury, so out was Shees with the injury, and then Dersma, Phillips and Pink, who were either dropped or managed. I think you could read that all 3 of them were dropped, really. And then coming in was Dylan Stephens, Zach Fisher, Georgie Wardlaw and Callan Dawson. So Dawson coming in to replace Pink in that key defensive or extra tall post. Georgie Wardlaw in for Phillips. Shees and Dersma, I guess, replaced by Fisher and Dylan Stephens. Yeah, obviously not completely like for like, but yeah, some changes through form and, I guess, structure. We certainly want to go taller down back, knowing that the Dogs have a really tall forward line because Pink has been playing mostly forward line and Callan Dawson's come in and played in defence. And boy, that whilst that may have been a plan, it didn't necessarily go to plan. Miller Bergman was the sub. He came on as the sub to replace Chom, who we'll talk about in a minute, but both Bergman and Chom ended up with concussions. So a dirty day for both of them. It was also Bailey Scott's 100th game. And as I mentioned later on in the podcast, he's signed an extension for 2 years. So celebrating his 100th game with a contract extension. And I think, in theory, it's hard to argue with most of the inclusions. Wardlaw is back if he's fit, and that meant that Will Phil had to make way. I think it made sense to go taller down back with Callan Dawson. And then Dersman unfortunately hasn't been able to get his hands on the footy, and she's needed to be replaced. So Fisher and Stephens are both, ball carriers and ball handlers that hopefully can replace some of what Shees gives you. It certainly wasn't the case, but I could see that would have been the hope. And then unfortunately that brings us to the match result, which was the Bulldogs 2018-138 defeats North Melbourne 6-6-42. And it's a 96-point loss for those of you trying to do that maths at home. A minor relief, I suppose, that we were able to wrangle it to under 100. But, if that's the relief you're taking out of the game, I think we've got big issues. And spoiler, we did in this game. The first quarter was actually not too bad. We got off to a pretty good start, kicked a couple of quick goals, and at quarter time we were down by 11. But we'd kicked 2 goals to 1 at one point. We kicked another one late, and we were looking okay, sort of competitive at quarter time. And then it just all fell apart. Second quarter we kicked 1 point to 4 goals 7. Third quarter, we kicked 1 goal to 7 goals 5. And then much, much better in the last quarter where we kicked 2 goals 1 to 4 goals 3. So the middle part of that game was where we were absolutely smashed in the second and third quarters. I guess if I'm doing the maths there, we kicked 1 goal 1 to 11 goals 12 in that time in the second and third quarter. So that's where the bulk of the damage was done. There was a 9-goal run to the Dogs, which was just gut-wrenching. Sam Darcy, was marking it everywhere and goaling from everywhere. Ugle-Hagan looked particularly damaging early on. And the Dogs' mids were just dominating us. So Unfortunately, I mean, you could pick so many different stories of the game. The tools was a major factor in the middle part of the game. The Dogs just continued to take contested marks and marks inside 50. I'll pull the stats up for that while I'm talking, but that was a massive, massive issue, particularly after quarter time. And I guess that coincides with when Charlie Comben unfortunately was out. So we were smaller down back. We've got Core and Dawson trying their best, and then either it's Luke McDonald or it's Jackson Archer trying to play a little taller to cover that third option because they have Norton down there. They had Darcy, they've got Ugelhagen, and then Roy Lobb was playing in the ruck, so they had plenty of tall timber down there, just dominating us in the air, unfortunately. Marks inside 50, 18-6, and the contested marking stat was only 9-8, but I guess what you can read from that was that they were taking a lot of those contested marks in dangerous areas. They marked it 129 times to 77 for us, so that probably more speaks to their domination in terms of possession, but that was the major factor, I suppose, in terms of where the game got away from us. The other area of the ground where it was a major loss was the centre clearances. Unfortunately, 17-8, and we started the game extremely poorly in that area. Around the ground, not so bad. It was all square, 23-all, but they just won out of the middle despite Xerri absolutely dominating in the ruck. The Dogs did not have a hit-out to advantage. Tristan Xerri was clearly the best ruckman, and I thought clearly our best player on the ground. 48 hit-outs to 19 we won, but we just weren't able to convert that into clearance advantages, I suppose. And the Dogs just absolutely trounced us, had 60 more disposals, doubled our inside 50s, 35 more than our 34, which is a crazy, crazy number. It's pretty rare that you have a match where one team's got twice as many inside 50s. And it was just an absolute obliteration, unfortunately. So as you can imagine, it was pretty difficult to find 4 players to give votes for in the North Podium, which we'll get to in a minute. But just so deflating after, what's been a relatively positive 8 or 10 week period in this second half of the year. Unfortunately, the last couple of weeks we've tailed off, and now that we've come up against a good opposition, a top 8 opposition, we've been absolutely found out. We know that the Dogs have historically, or over the past 4 or 5 years, have played really well against us. Think of those Good Friday matchups. I think of Josh Bruce kicking 10. I think of Cody Waitman absolutely dominating us. There's been plenty of moments where the Dogs have embarrassed us, and this is just another one, unfortunately. Whilst I don't think it, whittles away at the season that we've had, I think it's not a great way to end. Knowing that we've got Hawthorn next week, who are in scintillating form and who will want to continue winning to keep that form going into finals, which is hard to believe they're going to be playing in finals. It's hard to see us bouncing back. I'd love to see us bounce back and have a round 24 win like we did last year. That would be fantastic. But yeah, there was just a lot of dejection when you looked around the North Melbourne players in the second half. It's not hard to see why, because it was just a shocking game after quarter time. Unfortunately, not a lot went right for us with the injuries, with the way that we were playing. There were certainly moments there where I thought we were applying pressure and trying our best, but it wavered, and we just were unable to go with the Dogs inside 50. Unfortunately, that has had far too much firepower. And the game was certainly over at halftime, but the fact that they just kept their foot to the floor, the Dogs, was sight to behold, and they're going to be a dangerous side in September, I think. Whilst we're not exactly a tip-top opposition, I think the Dogs can do some serious damage if they're able to get that ball into that forward line with their 3 tools that function really well. Players like Cody Waitman at their feet, and obviously I think probably the best player in the competition in Bontempelli in the middle. There's plenty to like. They didn't even have Tim English in the side for this one, with Rory Lobb being the main ruck. They could potentially bring back another tool. So scary, scary stuff. Let's have a look at the North Podium. As I said, it was challenging to come up with the votes here. Honestly, it's one of those games where you probably only really want to be awarding a 2 and a 1, because it's certainly not worth the 4 votes that we sometimes have seen from some of the other matches. It's really the only part of the podcast I've given some serious thought, to be honest. So it could be a little rambly beyond this point. I mentioned it earlier. I think Tristan Xerri has to be best on 44 hitouts, 15 of those to advantage. And like I said, the Dogs did not have a single hitout to advantage. 17 disposals, kicked a goal, 6 tackles, 5 marks, 3 of those contested, 4 clearances, and just toiled. He didn't have a huge metres gained game. I don't think that obviously he didn't have the impact at stoppage that he has in other matches. The Dogs really dominated, particularly at the centre clearances, but I just don't think that Xerri could have done a lot more. There was one moment, a kick sort of went over his head, and it ended up being a really high ball that Darcy took and kicked a goal from. That, I think Xerri looked a little silly, but he looked tired and he looked a bit confused about where the ball was going to drop. It certainly looked as though on replay that he probably could have got to Darcy and made a contest. So, look, that wasn't a great moment within the game. Beyond that, I think he tried his absolute heart out all day and was probably the only North player who could hold his head completely high, I think. Yeah, just love what he's been able to do this year. Takes his total to 38 votes for the year. So if you think about that, that's 9.5 perfect games. If you think about scoring on average, he's had a really, really fantastic season, and just such a shame that he wasn't able to have too many mates today. I went backwards and forwards on the 3 and the 2. I think the next best are Bailey Scott and Luke Davies-Uniacke. I've landed on LDU for the 3, but I could have had it the other way around. LDU had 30 touches, 8 marks, 4 tackles, 6 clearances. Just not one of those games where he was able to have a lot of impact. Got caught holding the ball a couple of times. A lot of his disposals were handballs. He wasn't able to have that penetration that he often has. Let me have a look at that. 16 hand passes, so more handballs than kicks, and certainly not as many meters gained as someone who got as much of the ball as him as you would expect. He had 283 meters gained. So, look, similar to Xerri in that it's hard for him to perform to the absolute optimum in a game like this where nothing's going right. But I do think he tried. There was a moment in the third quarter where he and Wardlaw were bursting off half-back. Wardlaw had a great pickup, busted a tackle, and then handballed it to LDU and missed. And LDU, I think it was pretty evident to me watching on TV that LDU just gave up on the play. Sort of dejected, I suppose. And look, logically speaking, he wasn't going to contest the next contest. And we were getting absolutely trounced at that point. Like, it's understandable, but that's one of those things where as a leader, you can't afford to see George, or can't afford to have George see you react that way. George had a really sloppy game. He ended up kicking a goal late, but was really fumbly, and I think probably not one of his better games of the year. And he missed that handball. It's disappointing, but I think you can't allow him to see LDU dropping his head like that, because it doesn't reflect very well on the team culture, I suppose. LDU is a leader, whether he likes it or not. He's in the age bracket and the profile of being a leader. So it was that was disappointing. But besides that, he did try his best. He tried to break some tackles. There were some moments within stoppages and in congestion that he was really clean and trying his best. But I certainly wouldn't say it was one of his more impactful 30 disposal games. He's getting the 3 on the back of not many of his teammates showing up, unfortunately. But 3 to LDU. Like I mentioned, Bailey Scott gets the 2. 26 disposals, kicked a goal, 6 marks, 4 inside 50s, and 646 metres gained. A little bit dodgy with the disposal at times, but that's kind of what you get from Bailey Scott. He was far and away the most metres gained player on the ground, nearly 200 more than the next best, which was Zach Fisher. Like I said, had a couple of questionable turnovers. You get that with him. His kicking's not a strength if he needs to really hit a target, but we know he's got great run and carry. Generally speaking, he's kicking the ball forward. 20 kicks from his 26 disposals. And I think he tried his best in his 100th. Not one of the ones that I would say. I'd say those 3 are probably the ones that you go, okay, they did more or less try their best all day. They had a positive impact on the game. And I think, Bailey was turning it over when he was trying. It's not as though he gave up on something. He had a couple of really good chases that didn't amount to anything. look, props to Bailey Scott in his 100th, and well done. I feel like the second half of the year he's played a little better than the first half of the year. He got 2 votes a couple of weeks back from me, and another 2 today. Probably not worth the same amount this game, but 2 is 2, so he moves on to 4 votes. And then I really struggled for the 1 vote. You could argue that Fisher and McKercher tried their best off half back, but just zero impact, unfortunately. A lot of kicks that ended up going straight back over their head. So I've gone with Robert Hansen Jr. You can roast me if you like, but I think the fact that he was playing up forward and was getting 0 service and was able to kick 2 goals, 1 from his 12 touches, took 4 marks and was just opportunistic. He was doing the sorts of things that you want to see a small forward do, getting himself to the right spots. Sure, would I love to see him tackling? Absolutely, but he is that scrawny type. He's not the bulky type of some of those, you think of Tyson Stengel and Brad Close. He doesn't quite have the weight of those blokes, but yeah, I think he probably had his best performance in terms of a small crumbing forward. I don't know if that's going to be enough to get him a contract for next year. I think at this stage I doubt it, but yeah, look, I'll give him the 1 vote. There was really no one else that was deserving of a vote. I thought Tommy Powell was okay, but yeah, look, besides that, it was really hard to find players to give votes for. So 2 goals in a team that's only kicked 6 and had very little access to the footy as a forward. Yeah, I'll give it to Robert Hansen Jr. And then pretty easy for the best opposition player has to go to Sam Darcy. Kicked 7 goals, 20 disposals, 9 marks, 4 of those contested, and just did as he pleased, to be honest. Had an opportunity to kick his 8th after siren and couldn't quite do it. The commentators were sort of urging him to kick 10 as he got up to 6 or 7 pretty early on. I think it was pretty early in the third maybe that he kicked his 6th. So yeah, he was the best of a really strong forward line. Like I mentioned, Ugle-Hagan was dangerous early as well. They were a fantastic combo up there. I suppose if you're barracking for the Dogs, Ugle-Hagan ended up only with 3. Norton kicked 2. So between the 3 tall forwards, they had 12 goals. Waitman kicked 2, so he also did his part as a small. And Sam Darcy was everywhere. He just looked like, and he does, he had far too much height. He outmarked Callum Dawson. He outmarked Aidan Corey. He outmarked Jackson Archer. There was no one that had the reach. And there was some fantastic kicking inside 50 that allowed him great access to the footy. So super, super fantastic game from Darcy, unfortunately. A breakout performance from him. He's been threatening all year. He's had some fantastic games, but this is by far the best game that he's played at AFL level. And yeah, he's going to be a real handful if he gets service like that. And particularly, even if we had Charlie Comben playing the full game and we have Griffin Logue in, we've got no one that can play as tall and as athletic as him, because he's not an absolute beanpole in that he also, he can't really run. He's got fantastic hops. He's fast once he gets going. And yeah, he's unstoppable if he's got to run and jump at it. So Sam Darcy, one to watch for the future, unfortunately, absolutely torched us, as did most of the Western Bulldogs side. And then let's have a look at what the North Podium looks like. It's 1 game to go. And Harry Sheasel, obviously out injured, didn't play, remains on 42 votes, out in front. But Tristan Xerri is now the only one who could catch him if he was to have a perfect game next week and Shees was to not vote or to miss again. He could potentially tie it up. So Sheasel 42, Xerri 38, LDU 37. That's your podium. A couple of potential swaps in those positions. Tommy Powell 12, Zerha McKercher 11, Chom 10, and Wardlaw and Larkey on 9. But all of those players a long way behind. So yeah, it will be interesting to see if Shees is able to come back next week and potentially poll a vote to, make it a certainty, or if Xerri can have a perfect performance and tie it up. We'll have to wait and see. I certainly wouldn't want to be risking Shees if he, if there's any doubt about him. So hopefully the coaching staff do the right thing by him. If he's not right, let's just wrap him up in cotton wool. I know, I'm sure it's tempting to try and get him out there, both for, best and fairest thinking and also for all Australian thinking, but it's the first game that he's missed. We'd hate for this to become a more serious issue. So that's how it stands. And then, like I said, the rest of the podcast, I'd normally go through some negatives and positives. I really haven't given it too much thought. I might just talk about the game for a little bit. Like I mentioned, the first quarter was actually not too bad. I thought McKercher had a really aggressive start, grabbed the ball off halfback and got a chain or two, and was looking positive. I thought Fisher had a great tap to set up a chain through the middle, which set up Larkey for an early goal. We got out the back, and then from there, it all just went downhill. And it's interesting because Charlie Comben had a horrific first quarter. One of the worst first quarters from a North Melbourne player I've seen in a long time. He got out-muscled by Darcy a couple of times, just trying to compete and get himself a contest at the ball rather than just out-muscling him and doing his part. Dropped an uncontested intercept mark that then led to a Dogs goal. Had a missed kick that again resulted in a turnover and a goal. So all of that was to say he was absolutely having a mare down back. And then as if that wasn't enough, he then ran back with the flight and absolutely smashed himself. It was unclear in the moment whether he'd knocked his head or it was shoulder or if it was a torso injury. As it turned out, it sounds as though there was an ankle issue as well as the fact that he copped a concussion. But, it was super brave, but one of those kind of stupid brave ones where I just don't know that he needed to be doing that. I wrote down it looked like the way that he behaves down back at times really reminds me of Lockie Hansen. I'm sure most of my listeners would be old enough to remember him well. He would just run back with the flight in a really aggressive and often dumb way and put himself in dumb situations and get injured as a result. And Chom has that tendency too. He's got that ability to just attack the footy and absolutely have no regard for what might be coming the other way. Ugle-Hagan, I'm fairly sure, was the one that ran through him. And so, Chom really only spent, I think he had 16% time on ground as a result of that incident. But in that 16% of the time on the ground, he had some absolute shocking decisions, unfortunately. So, look, I love Chom. I hope this is if he's got a concussion, actually, it will be the end of his season because he'll be in the protocols. But he probably shouldn't have been playing the last couple of weeks anyway, just from how banged up he's looked. I think, we all got a little bit lulled into how fantastically well he was playing in the middle part of the year as that intercept defender. Unfortunately, one-on-one, he just does not have it. So I think looking at how this has gone and, the way that he plays down back, if we can manufacture a situation where he is a loose in defence, I could see continuing to play him there next year. But personally, I think I'd like him to go forward now. We've got some continuity in his game playing in defence. We've got him some touch. But I think personally I'd like to see him go forward because he does not have that defensive craft as yet. Who knows? Maybe he will develop it. But he had a shocker. And then, like I mentioned, Miller Bergman came on for him and then got absolutely wiped by Dylan Stephens, who similarly was going back with the flight, but it was the player coming out the footy this time, bit of friendly fire. Dylan Stephens took him out. I'm not sure if it was a significant head knock or if it was from the whiplash, but also a concussion for Miller Bergman, so he didn't play in the second half. And then, as a result, we were down to 3 on the bench, and neither of those players will be available for selection next week. It's going to be an interesting week at selection because with Chom out, I assume probably Toby Pink comes back. Biggie Newen hasn't been playing VFL, so I don't think he's an option. You'd think probably it's going to be Callan Dawson, Toby Pink, and Aiden Core trying their best for the last round against Hawthorn. Who knows? But Chom's going to be unavailable. Miller Bergman's not going to be available either. Whether or not that gives an opportunity to someone like Riley Hardiman, I guess we can talk about that at the end. But that was the first quarter. It was the Charlie Comben clanger show, unfortunately, whilst, besides that, we actually played okay in the first quarter, besides a couple of really questionable turnovers. Xerri was getting back and taking some good contested marks. He kicked his goal in the first quarter. And then, from then on, it was a 9-goal capitulation. They kicked 9 in a row, and we just weren't able. A lot of these players I'm going to list here just weren't able to get their hands in the footy. Shields, Curtis, Teakle, Ford, Tucker, none of those players were really getting involved in the first half. Shields had a couple of good moments in the second half, created one of our goals as a result of creating a contest against Liam Jones, but we just weren't able to get our hands in the footy. I might just go through a couple of the players that I guess did or didn't do enough. because you could see him down the bottom there. I mean, Miller Bergman gets a pass. He knocked himself out. Brent Eagle, tried his best to present, but just was not able to impact the game. Took a mark late, and that was really the only moment of his that I can remember. Charlie Common, like I said, knocked himself out. Callan Dawson got mauled, unfortunately. Was just being forced to play a little bit too tall. Got caught in the lead a couple of times. He doesn't have fantastic acceleration. I think once Callan gets going, he's got great speed, but his acceleration off the mark isn't always there. I mentioned Paul Curtis. He really struggled to get involved in the game. Had a couple of good moments in terms of trying to impact, but ended up with 7 touches. And, part of that's not his fault. Part of that's the lack of service, but would have liked to see him push up a little bit more. Dill Stevens had 11 touches on his return, was pretty quiet, and certainly Bailey Scott was the better wingman. Aidan Corr, really similar to Callan Dawson, had a couple of good 1v1 victories or splits at least, but by and large, the Western Bulldogs forwards mauled our tall defenders, so Aidan Corr was not immune to that. Yeah, he struggled, played all the game, but yeah, he was always outsized by at least 5 centimetres. Eddie Ford struggled to get involved in the game. Jackson Archer wasn't able to get his intercepting happening because he was kind of having to play that third tall in the end, which, on most sides wouldn't be a problem, but against a side with 3 or 4 blokes that are 200 plus, it's pretty hard to expect Jackson to compete under those circumstances. He's 187 centimetres, so, not even 190. He's a tall, medium-sized player, I suppose. Not even. He's just a flat-out medium-sized player. So he was probably giving away 15 to 20 centimetres at times. So trying his best, but at that point, when you add on the wingspan, you've got no chance if you're Jackson Archer. Larky, like I mentioned, kicked a goal at the start of the game, and I thought really struggled to compete. I guess part of that was that because our ball movement was so stunted, he was often double or triple teamed, but I would have liked to see him take a couple more marks. He was only able to mark it twice. He did take or get a knock to the knee late in the second quarter, and it looked like potentially he might be out, but he got going again in the second half. Not sure if that was a knock or a twist, what the situation there was, but it was a nervous moment there. It looked like he was really grabbing at the knee, but seemed to come good. Luke McDonald did a better job on Cody Waitman than he's done in the past. It certainly wasn't always on Cody Waitman. There was some Jackson Archer time on him as well, but yeah, look, he was fine. Attacked the footy well. I mentioned Georgie Wardlaw. He really attacked the footy, but was really, really fumbly. Kicked a goal late, had 16 touches, 4 tackles, 5 clearances. So, tried his darndest, but just wasn't able to be clean, unfortunately. And potentially part of that is the fact that he hasn't been able to play for the last 3 or 4 weeks. Cam Zerha was the same. He took a couple of good grabs, 6 marks, but wasn't able to have much of an impact. Jai Simpkin took a really good specky late in the game with, 3 or 4 minutes to go. He got up really high, and that was a rare highlight in an otherwise pretty dour game. 22 touches and just looked slow at times, unfortunately. Some of that was him getting hospital hand passes, but some of it was him just getting stuck, being a bit flat-footed and unable to push off with some acceleration. So it was a pretty disappointing game from him for the most part. I mentioned McKercher and Fisher. They tried their best coming out of half-back, but just were mostly unable to hit a target. McKercher had 24 touches. Fisher had 31, but would have liked to see them hopefully hit a couple more targets, and it's hard to know whether to what extent that's them versus what's happening up the ground. And yeah, I thought Tommy Power was okay. He had 20 touches, 7 tackles, so tried his best, but I guess, like most of our players, just wasn't able to have a real impact on the game. So there's a bit of a run through most of the players. I just didn't have it in me. I could have listed negatives all day long, but suffice to say, marking, we were outmarked all day. Clearances in the centre, we were absolutely slaughtered. And we just were not able to match the Dogs with their spread. As soon as they got the ball at the source, it was out to players like Treloar, who had a field day through the middle. Bontempelli was feeding it out. DeRay was really good. Bailey Dale was fantastic off halfback. Ed Richards is a fantastic player. He kicked 2 goals and had 22 disposals. They just did as they pleased, unfortunately, the Dogs. Even Jack McRae, who came on as the sub, managed to kick 2 goals and have 17 touches from a 38% time on ground. So I think that tells a story as well. Anyway, it was a dirty day and not one that I would like to relive. I think let's turn our attention to the VFL and the other news from the week, because that might be a little bit more positive, or slightly at least. I've actually come back to this the next day, so not that it's going to make any difference to you listening to this, but I'm recording this part Monday evening. Need to take a break, had a couple of things to do. I'm much calmer now. I've spent a day at school with the kids gently ribbing me about how that game went, and look, there's 1 week to go. Let's talk about the VFL first. Unfortunately, a loss, and a season-ending loss. We weren't going to make finals either way, like I mentioned last week, but it was a 100-83 loss. Got away from us in the second half. We started okay, and then gradually Southport sort of drew away. Plenty of AFL-listed players playing. Greenwood was, of course, busy. He's always busy. 26 touches, a goal, 14 tackles, 7 clearances, and got a bit of a guard of honour as he left the ground. So you get the sense that he won't be going around for North Melbourne next year. Not sure if there's an AFL farewell in the works for this week. I personally could take it or leave it. He's not been a great of the club in terms of on-field, so I'd be surprised if we saw that. But, you know, he's been a really serviceable pickup, and we got him for free. So you can't argue with what he's been able to bring. But it's been clear from pretty early on in this year that he wasn't going to be able to find a spot in the side. Slevo had 27 touches and 2 goals, so pretty busy, but it's been difficult for him to translate that form to the AFL this year, unfortunately. Lazara, we know, an accumulator, had 30 touches. Will Dawson played an interesting role. He was playing a fair bit in the ruck. He had 10 touches, 10 tackles, 18 hit-outs, so we're really throwing him around and seeing what he can do. He is of all of our players that we're developing, he's the one that I think would be fantastic in several years if he can really come on, because he's got that height to potentially play as a key. We saw him, we tried to experiment with him forward for one match in the AFL, and then he got injured, so we haven't seen him back in that role at AFL level, but there certainly seems to be a fair bit of experimentation with him in the VFL. Blake Drury kicked a goal from 20 touches. Finbar Maley had 20 touches and was busy, as he often is, 6 marks, 5 clearances. Cooper Harvey had a couple of touches and 2 goals. Will Phillips, who was dropped, unfortunately, 20 touches, 7 clearances, and you'd just love to see him doing a little bit more at VFL level, I think. Tyler Sellers kicked a couple of goals, and then there were some quiet players, Hardeman, Payne, Goad. So for me, the interesting watch is whether or not we'll see any of these players next week, either as an experiment or in response to injury. Toby Pink was the non-playing emergency, so like I mentioned, I think it's probably likely that he comes in with Chom and Miller Bergman injured, and then whether or not someone like Riley Hardeman comes in, I mean, maybe Harry Sheasel's fit and able to come back in as well, I'm not sure. Will Dawson would be another option to play as a key back. And then I look at players like Slevo, Drury, Harvey, Phillips, like, do we get one more look at them? Slevo's a bit different because he's contracted for next year, whereas Drury, Harvey, and Phillips are not. So I do wonder if we might get one last look at any of those. But potentially decisions on them have already been made. Like, that may be why they're not in the side. Who knows? Yeah, I just think, to me, that's probably the most interesting thing about team selection coming up this last game against Hawthorn. Which of those players that I just went through are going to get a game, either as a farewell in the case of Greenwood, or as a bit of a look in the case of someone like Phillips and Harvey and Hardeman. Anyway, we'll see. Obviously, we know Goad's going to be around. We know Hardeman's going to be around. I think we all suspect that Maley's going to be around. Will Dawson's going to be around. Slevo's going to be around, but those other ones maybe less so. So that's one to watch. We also saw during the week, I alluded to it earlier in the podcast, Bailey Scott re-signed for an additional 2 years, so that takes him to 8 years and to free agency. He'll be a restricted free agent most likely at that time. So, yeah, great for the club. Like I mentioned, he's a really good, solid role player, and I think when we're playing better, he can be an even better role player He's not going to be a star. I don't think that's what we're going to get from him. But yeah, it's great to have players in his age bracket that are pretty consistent and that do want to stick around at least for the medium term. So we're now on to making some decisions on some of those other ones that I've talked about, like Harvey and Xerri and Sellers, those types. He hasn't had quite as strong a year as he has in the past two. We know that he finished third, the last two best and fairest. I certainly don't expect that to happen this year. But he's still been serviceable, and I think he's improved as the year's gone on. He's probably still going to end up in the top 10, just based on the fact that we haven't had heaps of players playing consistently well this year. Look, we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but he's had some good games, and like I said, the second half of the year, he's had some games where he's got some votes from me. So obviously the AFL or the North Melbourne people that are the voting on the best and fairest, I'm sure, are looking at the North Podium and making some decisions based on that, or using that to support their decision making. And the other, this is a bit more positive. We've had our AFL practice match. We had some match simulation for the women's league last weekend, and this weekend we actually had a practice match against GWS up in Sydney. It was a mauling, really, 77-20 win. So it does look as though the North Melbourne Tasmanian Kangaroos, as we're officially called, are going to be very competitive again this year. Usual suspects were fantastic. Jazzy Garner had 23 touches, kicked a couple of goals. Ash Riddell had 38 disposals, so plenty of the footy. Yeah, they're looking super sharp. Not a heap of turnover from last year. A couple of new players, couple of players moved on, but it's a pretty consistent group from the past couple of years. And yeah, I think another great opportunity for a push. Unfortunately lost the grand final last year in pretty heartbreaking circumstances. Hopefully we can go one better this year. So I do plan to cover a little bit of the AFLW match stuff as we head into the later months of the year. Not exactly sure what that's going to look like yet, but potentially some similar coverage to what we've seen from the AFL men's stuff, maybe a little bit shortened, but stay tuned for that. The first match is during that bye round between the end of the home and away season, the finals for the men. So the girls got a week off this week, and then Sunday, September 1 is round 1, grand final rematch against Brisbane. So that'll be super exciting. And there's no AFL men's footy on, so great opportunity to watch the women's on that weekend, launch their season, and then obviously they'll be playing for the next 10 to 12 weeks, depending on what finals looks like and whatnot. Super excited. At least if the men's side is garbage, we know that we've got a really, really competitive, strong women's side, and it should be similar to last year. I think this grand final rematch should be a fantastic test because, it's a tough start actually for the women. I can't remember the other matches, but I remember reading it was quite challenging. Let me have a look. Brisbane, Geelong, Melbourne, Port Adelaide. Yeah, it's a pretty tough start. So, like I said, Sunday, 3:05, Sunday, September 1, 3:05. It's up in Brisbane, so we won't be heading along, but certainly looking forward to watching that one on the TV. So, in terms of next week, like I alluded to earlier, we do have the Hawks. It is 4:35 Saturday afternoon, August 24, down in Launceston. The Hawks are primed. They're in ripper form. They had a late loss or a close loss to GWS a couple of weeks ago, but besides that, they're on quite the hot streak. They're now sitting in 7th position, so they're in that situation where if they win, they are in finals. If they lose, they could still make finals depending on other results. But yeah, they're in ripper form, and it's certainly when we saw the fixture at the start of the year, I think most people thought that 3 out of our last 4 games were going to be, winnable games. And even up until sort of the middle point of the year, I think we were all thinking that. Hawthorn's gone on a massive run since then, somehow, and are now sitting primed for a finals tilt, which in a lot of ways hurts and is frustrating because the Hawks are supposed to be down where we are. And look, we all know that improvement's not linear. There's every chance that they go backwards next year or, things go pear-shaped in finals. But also, there's every chance that they pull a Western Bulldogs and are super competitive in the finals. So, yeah, they're going to be raring to go. I wouldn't expect them to be resting anyone given they're playing off momentum right now. We know they've got some great small forwards. Ginnivan's down there. I really like Nick Watson as a player. I think I would have been so keen to get the Wizard down to North Melbourne. We're crying out for a player like him. Anyway, we didn't go with him. We went with Dersma and Colby McKercher. We certainly can't complain about McKercher, and I do think Dersma will get there. Anyway, that's who we've got. We've got the Hawks. I would just love to compete. That's, I think, what's super important. We cannot afford to get bent over like the Dogs did to us again. We've got to compete, whatever that looks like in this game. Launceston is a bit of a fortress for the Hawks, but they've got so many new players in the side. It's really Jack Gunston and Luke Bruce are the only two old heads in there, so there's not a lot of, those players that went down to Launceston and never lost. Most of them aren't there anymore. It's a bit like us going down to Hobart. There's not many players that have played in successful games down in Hobart. Same for Launceston for the Hawks. Yeah, just need to see a bit of a response from what we saw against the Dogs, because that was a really hard watch. And I think, whilst no kind of result's going to make up for what happened against the Dogs, I just think in order to go away over the summer and feel, some kind of positivity going into the break, into the pre-season, we don't need a win like we got last year against the Gold Coast, but we need something. And that something might be staying in the game for 3 quarters. It might be, going close. It might be an honourable loss. And I know that most fans are over honourable losses, but I think for right now, for this year, for where we're at, that kind of needs to be our benchmark. We need to be comfortable with that, not happy with it, but comfortable with it, and then hopefully we can move forward into 2025 with a little bit more positivity and a little bit more rose-tinted glasses about what we were able to achieve in 2024. I think that is going to do us for this podcast. I did forget last week to give a shout out to a review that I got on Apple Podcasts, so thank you very much to Gatty18. They gave us a 5-star review and said, very good analysis on NMC, great insight into the game and players. Always enjoy listening to Jason's thoughts on NMFC. So thank you, Gaddy18. I really appreciate it. I'm a bit late on giving you the shout out, but I really do appreciate it. If you'd like a shout out, feel free to please leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or give me a 5-star rating on Spotify. It really helps get the podcast out there. If you're interested in supporting the show in another way, you can find my Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes as well. I really do appreciate every little bit that everyone does. So even if that is listening to the podcast and having a chat to me on social media, I really appreciate everyone's engagement. It's been another long season, and we just have one more match to get through, and then we can sit back and hopefully watch the women show us how it's done. For the last time for a little while, I'll see you next week. That's not true, actually. We'll be back after the last round. We've got plenty of other things to talk about. But for our penultimate match wrap-up, I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I'll speak to you probably sometime late next weekend. Go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at North Pod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.